Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seats. Welcome to the final panel of the very easy questions. The first panel dealt with the easy question, is the world redeemable? The second panel was dealing with the question, is the human being redeemable? Now we are approaching to the hardest one, is God redeemable? We are going to have the pleasure of listening to three great speakers. I will introduce each one of them before they would start to speak, but before we would start with the presenters, I would like to say a few comments on the issue of redemption. Because before we would deal with Rosenzweig idea of redemption, about God and redemption and Redeemer, I would like to share the following observation. I'll start with a philological one. The word Messiah doesn't have a verb. We have many words like Redeemer from redemption, Savior from salvation, but in Hebrew there is no verb for the word Messiah. We have Goel and Geula, Redeemer and redemption, but the word Messiah, which is usually perceived as the name of the Redeemer, doesn't have a verb. We have to note that, because if there is no verb, it is not a human being. It is a different thing. And while very often people are wrongly assuming that the Messiah is a person, a historical person, a human being of some kind, this is wrong, because according to the Jewish history and written history, the Messiah is not a person. It is an idea. And the idea says that everything could be in a different way. The Messiah is the incarnation of defiance. When history is failing, the Messiah is the horizon, is the hope, is the defiance that history is not the final experience, but there could be something else. There could be an alternative existence. There is a room for hope. There is a room for alternative thought. And for the Jews who had spent most of their history in exile, the redemption is tightly tied with the experience of exile. When history is perceived as exile, redemption is the center of hope and focus of hope and ever-creating idea. The idea of redemption is an ongoing developed idea. It's not only the biblical idea, not only the sages' idea, not only Maimonides' idea. It is first and foremost the mystical idea of the Messiah, and great part of the mystical tradition in Judaism is the integration between the messianic idea and the mystical horizon. We have to bear that in mind before we would suggest that the idea of redemption could be dropped, that the redemption is one subject that Jews and Christians have very different opinions about, because as you recall, the Jews believe that the Messiah will come, whatever he might be. The Christians believe that the Messiah already came and he will return. There is a fundamental difference about perception of redemption if you think that you have an historical anchor about the Messiah, as said the Christians, or if you think, as the Jews suggest, that the Messiah was born in the day that the temple was destroyed. Not only the Messiah was born, or the Redeemer was born, in the day that the temple was destroyed, but also the idea of the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah, the female dimension of the Godhead. When we talk on the redemption of the Godhead or of God, we have to remember that the Kabbalistic tradition suggests that one may reinvent the divine or the Godhead, and suggesting that there is a male dimension and female dimension. The female dimension, according to the Kabbalah, is called the Shekhinah, which is the incarnation of the voice of the daughter of Zion from the first temple, from Lamentation scroll, Megillat Eicha, when the first unbodied voice of the community of Israel is speaking in the scroll of Lamentation, the idea of the Shekhinah is starting to consolidate. So if we say that the topic of the discussion is God redeemable? Let's ask, what kind of God? Is it the biblical God, the idealistic God, Kant God, Hegel, Rosenzweig, what kind of God we are talking about when we ask the question, is God redeemable? The Kabbalah stated explicitly that it's upon human being to redeem the divine, with detailed instructions how they should do it, how every commandment that is being done is reflecting an effort, an ongoing effort to redeem the fallen Shekhinah, which is part of the Godhead, to unite the Shekhinah and the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, and his consort, the Shekhinah. There are numerous books and numerous pages about the new perception of the Godhead as redeemable by the human being. Because if there is one thing that the Kabbalah had introduced, which is of great importance, is the anthropomorphization of the Godhead, its division to male and female, which should be united, in male and female, of course, in the symbolical way, that should be united by human efforts. So it is a new perception of the divine, a new perception of the Godhead. The humans are called to redeem the Shekhinah, and they're doing it through the Kabbalistic literature. There are many other aspects, but I would stop here, and I would invite our three speakers to offer their presentation, either from their seats or from here. And I would like to start by introducing our first speaker, Professor Hans Christoph Askani. Professor Askani is a professor of systematic theology at the University of Geneva. He was previously a professor of systematic theology at the Institut Protestant de Théologie in Paris. He is the author of various publications on philosophical and theological subjects. The last one, among the most important ones, is his book, The Problem of Translation. It's in German, but I read it in English. The Problem of Translation, presented to Franz Rosenzweig, the methods and principles of Rosenzweig and Bube-Rosenzweig translation. And his other work is The Wisdom and Foolishness of God, 1 Corinthians 1:2, in theological exploration, and his work on the obscure object of translation. Professor Askani, please.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, 2 days ago, a friend of mine wrote to me, "I envy you that you are in Jerusalem." Unfortunately, she forgot the second half of the sentence, but that you are supposed to talk about the question, is God redeemable? I don't envy you. In fact, I'll speak in a language that I am not really able to speak about a question that I am not really able to answer. If one thinks at all of redemption, and I must suddenly add, nobody forces us to do it. But if one thinks of redemption, then in a world so full of suffering, so full of injustice, and in memory of the inconceivable and unbearable suffering in the history, one cannot not ask the question of the redeemability of the world, of man, and also of God, of all three. But how? In the sense of a theoretical, socio-political, philosophical, theological question, or in another way, not theoretically, not calmly, not distanced, not in such a way that one can place it or not place it, but in such a way that the question imposes itself upon one, and that it takes one with it where one does not measure it, as a cry, as a cry of which we don't know whether it will ever arrive at its aim. A cry to God and to ourselves at the same time. Are we redeemable? And are you redeemable? God and man then hang together in this cry in a completely unexpected way. And they will never be again released from this hanging together, unless they would really be redeemed and thereby released from each other as a solution to the desperate connection between God and man, so that they can face each other again, and perhaps words will take the place of the cry again. For the words mentioned a moment ago, are we redeemable? Are you redeemable? Are only auxiliary words that are there to fill the void of the cry, because we cannot endure this void. And the truth about them is not their content, but that they go in two directions at the same time, to man and to God. To God and us human beings. But I am not here to pronounce a prayer, but to give a lecture. So I must speak in a different way. But also on this other level, I must say that I'm afraid to ask the question, is God redeemable? It sounds to me formulated in a theoretical, philosophical, theological way, not only provocative, but also blasphemous. I'll try to explain why. When I think of redemption, and I say again, nobody forces us to do it, but when I think of redemption, I hope for it in the last from God. And vice versa, if I hope for something from God, then it is in the last, the very last redemption. And now this term is to be applied to God himself. Isn't it then as if I were, so questioning, to place myself above him? Something is wrong there. And yet a question at a congress about Franz Rosenzweig does not come by chance, because Rosenzweig involved indeed God in the event of redemption, not only as the subject who has redemption in his hands, but as the one to whom it also happens. Is that reasonable? Is that inevitable? Is this understandable? So I come to my first part, the question. Is God redeemable? The question contains at least two aspects. Can God be redeemed? And does God need to be redeemed? Both aspects are present in the star of redemption. In an initially rather formal operation, one can understand the condition under which the thought that God must be redeemed perhaps makes sense. This is the case when God has gone so far into the world that he can no longer detach himself from it, And therefore, if the world is to be redeemed, he must be redeemed with it. Another, still formal, but also not merely formal, implication of the idea that God must be redeemed is this redemption is not already granted from the beginning. It must take place. If it were granted from the beginning, then it would be invested in God, and God would not be affected by it. He would only be the active redeemer. Rosenzweig is thinking exactly against this. How does he do it? The solution of all, of, let's say, the confusion of the world, of its ambiguity, of the incomprehensible evil, and of the even more incomprehensible fact that there is evil even though there is good, and there is good even though there is incomprehensible evil. The solution of all this does not exist. There is no redemption guaranteed from the beginning. It is not the basic date, not the precondition of the whole. This was precisely what idealism had advocated, against whose system and systems Rosenzweig conceived his system, the system of the Star of Redemption. The idea of redemption in the strict sense is alien to idealism. In its place stands the category of perfection. But perfection is by definition that what has already been invested from the beginning. To the concept of redemption belongs a contradiction, a contradictoriness that goes beyond any idealism. For in idealism, the things to be hoped for and the things to be thought go hand in hand. In order to think that what is to be thought and what is to be hoped for does not go hand in hand, Rosenzweig had to create his own system, the one whose emblem is the star. The glow of this star is unthinkable. But it is impossible that thinking is not attracted by its light. And I come to my second part, redemption as a language event. One can approach the question of redemption in different ways. I will do it on the way through the theme of language, and hopefully it will show that this approach is not arbitrary. According to Rosenzweig, everything has happened in language since creation. Why? Because without language, reality is not. So let us now go forward to the question of whether God can and must be redeemed under the condition that language determines events and relationships between God, the world, and man. And let's start with the world. The world became the created world through God's creative judgment. And God saw that it was good. Through this divine word, the world was put into being before God and handed over to its own worldliness. if we want to understand to what extent this has to do with redemption, we must realize that the world is not only what God says to it, but also what the world, makes of it. Of course, the fact that the world makes something of itself does not necessarily bring it nearer to redemption. On the contrary, that the world makes something of itself is its own worldliness, and possibly just deepens the distance from the good that God spoke about it. And yet, it is precisely in the fact that God released the world into its own worldliness that he opened up the possibility of redemption for it at all. If the world, had remained under God's all-determining guidance, it would not have become the world as world, nor would the question of redemption have been raised in relation to it and for it. Conversely, because the world was called into being by God and is thus called to autonomy, the good spoken of by God about it must be realized by it itself. How's that supposed to happen? To put it briefly, the predicate good must not only go from God to the world, it must also go from the world to God. Wasn't the initial good spoken by God designed so that it resounds in the world? And that the being of the world becomes such a resounding. But for it to become this, does not the world need man, the human being, for it? So that's how we get to man. Indeed, the greatest language event takes place when the human being appears on the scene. When the world first became the world in God's judgment about it, then man first becomes man in the decisive sense of the word in God's address to him. In this address, he becomes the I who speaks himself, insofar as he discovers himself and his language, in the answer which he cannot not give to God. God asks for him, man, man faces him, God. I say it in German in order to avoid misunderstandings. Gott fragt nach ihm, dem Menschen, der Mensch stellt sich ihm, Gott. So that between them there is one, the divine human language that unites and separates them. But as in the relation to the world, for which the divine word of creation is not the final point, but the opening of its independence, so here too, in the relationship between God and man, the mere address of God, which arrives at a human being, cannot stop at it. The dynamic of the word that God addresses to man wants to go on, and even in the answer that man gives to God, it cannot be absorbed. It must go on as word. It must go further on. That is, it must become not only response, but responsibility. It cannot remain in the placid back and forth of divine address and human response. It must be lived. It must go out into the world. And so man, when he discovers himself to be God's addressed one, needs the world so that God's word does not lose itself in the human being's self-satisfied solitude. Just as the world needs the human being so that the divine good may resound once in itself. So, how do the world and man relate to each other in relation to salvation? The two, we already said it, redeem each other. The creative good, which made the world God's creature, must return to God. The world must be raised away from its independence in itself to language. And only man, only the human being can do that for them, for the world and for God. This is the one way in which the human being and the world work together for redemption. But there is a second way, and it is also a way in which the world comes to language. The divine commandment of love must speak into it, but it does this by man taking it upon himself and carrying it into the world by assuming responsibility for it. In this assumption of responsibility, a double thing happens. The world rises before God in the good to which it was destined, and man seizes before God as that counterpart whom God has chosen for himself, by not only giving back to God his love and his language, which he both received from God, but by passing them on to the world. So this is the redemption as it is to take place between God and the world, and as God is drawn into it himself as the one who must also be redeemed. But how? But why that? It sounds paradoxically, but it's actually not, as Rosenzweig explained in the Star of Redemption. God must be redeemed himself because he put the redemption in the hands and in the words of man and of the world. And I come to my third and last part. God's redemption and the humility of God. We have already touched the redemption in relation to God, namely that God not only redeems, but is redeemed in the redemption himself. The special thing about it is that God in redemption refers not only to man and not only to the world, but to both together. Insofar as they, precisely for the sake of redemption, are related to one another. This reference also concerns God. And only in the fact that God does not have redemption in his hands does it become concrete that God also experiences redemption. If we want to deepen this knowledge, we have to pay attention to a term that bundles all the astonishment of the thought in itself: the humility of God. The tension could not be greater than between these two words, God and humility. What's this combination supposed to mean? It is meant that God makes himself dependent. How does he do it? In love, but one must put it more precisely, in unfounded love. As Rosenzweig once said, that man's shortcomings are more powerful awakeners of divine love than his virtues. For in unfounded love, God makes himself doubly dependent on the one whom he loves and on his unfounded love, which cannot be derived from anywhere. In this love, an unfinished dimension breaks open in God himself. The tension could not be greater than between God and humility, we said, but it is not man, but God who brings them together on the path. Redemption does not mean the world entangled in innumerable ambiguities and abysses would be transferred into a state of perfection by a divine instance, be it in a world historical process, be it in a selective, wonderful act of divine exercise of power. Redemption means God, world, and man are not yet what they are, but for them to become what they are and what they will be, they need each other. Yes, as amazing as it is, this is the core of redemption for man. God needs him for his, God's redemption. And in this lies the redemption for God. The world and man still have to become what they are. And in this lies redemption for the world. God did not realize it in the beginning for the world, but the world and man will realize it in the future for God. I come to the end. So that redemption concerns all three together. And so that all three in their mutual redemption may enter into the kingdom of which at the same time it is true that God is his Lord. The eternal God who entered into time, and the God who entered into time in creation and revelation, who never ceased to be eternal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Askani. That certainly calls for a lot of reflection. I'm sure that we would hear more of that. Before I would call our second speaker, I would like to quote one sentence of the American Jewish historian, Professor Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, in his famous book, Zachor. Yerushalmi said, "Nothing came in place of the cohesion and significance that the powerful messianic faith radiated on the Jewish past and on the Jewish future. Because before we were about to redeem God, we were waiting for a very long time for God to redeem us." Before Rosenzweig had exchanged the order, who is redeeming who, we had a very long historical experience of waiting for redemption, constructing redemption, reflecting about Messiah and redemption in an entirely different direction. All right, I would like now to present our second speaker, Professor Paul Walter Franks, a professor of philosophy who had graduated in Harvard quite a few years ago, and he wrote his dissertation on Kant and Hegel on the esotericism of philosophy. Professor Frank was teaching at the University of Toronto as the chair of the philosophy department, and later on he got a senior position at Yale University, where he teaches in the Department of Philosophy, the program of Judaic Studies, the Department of Religious Studies, and the Department of Germanic Languages and Literature. Among his numerous writings, I would note three. His book, All or Nothing, Skepticism, Transcendental Arguments, and Systemacity in German Idealism. His second book, Franz Rosenzweig, Theological and Philosophical Writing, translated, edited, and annotated and commented upon together with Michael Morgan, and his very interesting article, Everyday Speech and Revelatory Speech in Rosenzweig and Wittgenstein. Thank you very much, and please present your paper.
Take me a minute to get the hang of the Hebrew instructions, which are different from the ones I'm used to.
It says in English, redeemable.
Okay, yes.
Right?
Yes. Okay, good. All right. If the world and the human are to be redeemable, indeed, if redemption itself is to be redeemable, then I'm going to argue God must be redeemable. This is, of course, a hypothetical. Conversely, if God is not redeemable, then we should abandon the very idea of redemption. So I shall argue. By redemption, I understand a concept or a family of concepts expressed by a cluster of Hebrew words, Geulah, Pidyon, Yeshua. We had a very interesting paper from Bob Gibbs about the difficulties and complexities of translating the word Erlösung. Redemption, as I understand it, is liberation from injustice, domination, and dependence. But it is not merely the restoration of a prior independence. Redemption is also an elevation, the achievement of a higher state that retrospectively justifies the injustice, the domination, and the dependence, which are the price paid for elevation. We yearn for the retrospective justification of our suffering, yet we also know all too well what abuses follow from the prospective sense that the suffering we both endure and cause will ultimately be rendered worthwhile. I think that was the source of the dissatisfaction that Paul Mendes-Flohr expressed with the notion of redemption at the first panel 2 nights ago. According to Rosensweig, there is an impasse. The human cannot redeem the world, and the world cannot redeem the human. Rosenzweig cites the words of Queen Luisa of Prussia, "Es kann nur gut werden in der Welt durch die Guten." And only through the good can good come about in the world. But, says Rosenzweig, a good individual can bring pure goodness forth from the world only if everyone is good, and only if the world itself is already good. Putting the point in different words, if human action is dependent on the world, but the world is also dependent on human action, the impasse can be solved only if both the human and the world are redeemed by a third party, namely by God. The idea that we humans can redeem ourselves in the world, this is the hubris of redemptive politics, whether on the left or on the right. And no less problematic is the idea that the world on its own can redeem the human, that the destruction of human politics, of human society, would inaugurate an age of renewed innocence. And if these are the only forms of redemption available, then I think redemption is irredeemable. Give it up. Redemption can be redeemed only if redemption comes from God, only if we operate under the theistic sign of humility. But then one wants to ask, what kind of God could have allowed this impasse to emerge in the first place? What kind of God could create a situation in which both world and human seem irredeemably tainted? God too stands in need of redemption, so it is only if God is redeemed that redemption can be redeemed. Of course, this is a version of the problem of evil, and Rosenzweig's response, I want to show, draws on Midrash and Kabbalah as well as classical German philosophy. twice in his writings, Rosenzweig alludes to a midrash about God's need for redemption. Once in the essay Atheistic Theology and once in The Star. As far as I know, this midrash has not been identified before. I know that Mike Morgan and I did not yet know where it was when we published our translations with annotations of atheistic theology and other essays. So what Rosenzweig says there is that it is God, not human presumption, that makes God dependent on the human. According to a profound parable, Rosenzweig says in Atheistic Theology, I put the German on the slide, God sells himself, verkauft sich, to the human. And the very same idea is cited again in the Star of Redemption. Nothing would be more natural, Rosenzweig says, than for the God of our fathers to sell himself for Israel and to share Israel's sufferings. So by this point in the Star, Rosenzweig is connecting the idea of God selling God's self to the idea that Professor Elior mentioned earlier of the Shekhinah, and in particular the Shekhinah suffering and going into exile along with the people of Israel. I believe that the midrash to which he is referring is from Shmot Rabbah on Parshat Truma. I won't read out the whole midrash, but I'll read out some parts in English. There is a kind of gift along with which the seller is sold, the midrash says. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Israel, I have sold you my Torah. As it were, I am sold with it. As it says, V'yikhu li truma, which presumably the midrash reads, not take an offering for me, but take me as an offering. Then the midrash compares this situation to the parable of a king who is marrying his daughter to a worthy prince or a worthy king. And then the son-in-law and the daughter want to go back to their land. And the king says, my daughter is my only one. I cannot separate from her, but I also cannot tell you to stay here. So take me with. So the kind of gift along with which the seller is sold is apparently one's parents-in-law. And everybody knows that they come with in the package when you get married. So the father-in-law king says, wherever you go, just make a little room for me. V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'torcham. Make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in it. So that, I think, is the idea of God selling himself along with the Torah to the people of Israel. But I think that midrash, which is relatively late, presupposes another one, which is not cited explicitly. A midrash which is much earlier, on a pasuk from the second book of Samuel, chapter 7, verse 23. Umi ka'amcha Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz. Who is like your people, like Israel, one nation in the land? Asher halchu Elohim liftot lo la'am v'lasum lo shem. Whom God went to redeem for himself as a people and to make for himself a name. V'lasot lachem hagdula v'nora'ot le'artzecha. And to make greatness for you and awesome things for your land. Now here comes the important part. Mipnei amcha asher padita lecha mitzrayim goyim ve'elohav. Because of your people whom you redeemed from Egypt for yourself, nations and their God. Now there are different ways to read that last part, but the way the Midrash reads it, it's Rabbi Akiva, as we'll see in a minute, is that the nation who is redeemed is Israel, and therefore it is God who is redeemed, not the gods of other nations. So Rabbi Akiva says, this is in the Mechilta, so it's an early Midrashic source, Ilam ale mikra katuv yev shalom ro. We often see that in Midrash. If it weren't written in Scripture, it would be impossible to say it. It would be heretical. But it says it. Right? Ki biyachol amru Yisrael ifnei hamakom atzmecha padita. As it were, Israel said to the Holy One, you have redeemed yourself. Right? Because you redeemed Goyim ve'Elohav, the nations and their God. And then it goes on to say that you'll find also that any place where the people of Israel go into exile, the Shekhinah goes with them as well. So I think that lies behind what the Midrashic association that Rosenzweig is making. And what's fascinating is that he develops this immediately in the Star of Redemption in the direction of Kabbalah. In this Midrash, he finds the root of the much later Kabbalistic formula that many people say before the performance of a mitzvah. And again, this is something to which Professor Elior referred. So it's customary to say, L'shem yichud kudsha barichu shchinte, for the sake of the unity of the Holy One, blessed be He, and His Shekhinah, b'dechilu u'rechimu liyachto shem yudhe b'vavhe, in awe and love to unite the letters yudhe with vavhe, making the tetragrammaton, b'yichudah shlim, in perfect unity, b'shem kol Yisrael, in the name of all of Israel. And Rosenzweig comments at length at the end, towards the end of the star, on this formula. So, I'll read out the English. This is from a section called the Unification of God. The Jewish person, Rosenzweig says, fulfills the endless demands and prescriptions, quote, for the unification of the Holy God and His Shekhinah. With this formulation, he prepares his heart in awe and love. He, the individual, the remainder, the remnant of Israel, in the name of all Israel, to fulfill the commandment that is directly incumbent upon him. He will gather the divine glory, which lies scattered in countless sparks throughout the world, from dispersion, and bring them home once again to the one who has been stripped of his glory. Each of his acts, each fulfillment of a law brings about a portion of this unification. To confess God's unity, that is what the Jew calls it. It is, insofar as it becomes, it is coming to unity. So the unity of God is something that is still not yet, to use Professor Askani's expression, it's still not yet what it is. And this is a drama in which the human being has a role, but as Rosenzweig will point out, has a role insofar as one is responding to a divine commandment. So it is crucial that there are two different places in which God stands here. God is the commander, and God is ultimately the Lord of redemption. But God is also the one who is being redeemed by means of the human actions which are commanded. So there is a point of contact, and this is, I think, the point that Rosenzweig wanted to make in atheistic theology. There is a point of contact with an atheistic approach because the Kabbalistic view of redemption gives a certain role to the human. It is not merely a question of passively waiting for divine redemption, for God to do everything. But at the same time, it is ultimately God who is doing the redeeming, even though our actions play a role. And the passage continues with more commentary on the Kabbalistic formula. And this becoming is enjoined upon the soul and hands of the human. Jewish man and Jewish law, nothing less than the process of redemption, embracing God world and the human, is in play between the two. The fulfilling of the commandment is inaugurated and stamped as an act which brings redemption nearer, with a formula in which the individual elements, as they are absorbed into this last one, once more resound individually. The Holy God, Kudsha, who has given the law, the Shekhinah, which he expropriated from himself to the remnant of Israel. So the Shekhinah is what was, in this the metaphors are getting mixed, but the Shekhinah is what was being sold, as it were. It's the aspect of God that is sold along with the Torah. And the awe with which this remnant of Israel turned itself into the dwelling place of God. The love with which he, the individual, thereupon proceeded to fulfill the law. He, the individual, the I, which fulfills the law, even he, in the name of all Israel, to which the law was given, and which was created through the law. The most constricted has expanded into the whole, the all. No better has redeemed itself for the unification of the one. So, in the Kabbalistic formula is expressed the human contribution to God's self-redemption, whereby alone is there to be accomplished the redemption of the world and the human. The redemption of redemption itself by means of the fulfillment of mitzvot. The tzimtzum of the Shekhinah in the sanctuary, the concentration of the Shekhinah in the sanctuary, constriction in the translation I just read out, is not only the particularization of the universal, but it is also the universalization of the particular. And this is how, to return to the words of the Prussian queen, the good can bring good into the world without falling into the temptation of human hubris, only insofar as the single individual I acts in the name of the singular people formed through nothing other than divine address, as a people within whom dwells the divine presence, or to whom the Shekhinah along with the Torah has been entrusted or sold. As Rosenzweig notes in Atheistic Theology, the continuation of the passage I read out before, he who could sell also has a claim to the purchase price. In other words, God is not only, as the Shekhinah, the one who is sold, but is also, as the Holy One, blessed be He, the seller. If God were only sold, were only dependent on the human, then redemption would be up to us alone, which is a recipe for self-aggrandizement and disaster. If God were not sold at all, then we humans could contribute nothing to redemption, and our actions would lack ultimate significance. But since God is both the sold and the seller, we humans may contribute to redemption in all due humility, with awe and love. Rosenzweig thinks this thought through literally to the end. If God must be not only immanent in Israel's life of Torah and mitzvot, but also transcendent, then God must not only be the creator and the revealer, but also the redeemer, who not only precedes but also succeeds creation. From its inception in the Spinozism controversy of 1785, German idealism negotiated between the ideal of thoroughgoing systematicity on the one hand and the apparent threat of nihilism on the other. It was Jacobi who initiated that controversy and who really introduced the term nihilismus into the philosophical lexicon. In God's redemptive self-restitution, Rosenzweig argues, nihilism itself is finally redeemed. We can learn to live with the ultimate prospect of the annihilation of humanity, of the end of the world, if the restituted divine unity that succeeds creation is higher than the unity that precedes it. Here at last does the slogan written by Lessing on the wall of Gleim's garden house, Hen Kai Pan, one and all, find its proper place. And Rosenzweig explicitly invokes that very slogan, which was taken by Lessing from Cudworth's account of pagan Egyptian monotheism. But this slogan now, in Rosenzweig's view, has been redeemed by Judaism, for which it signifies not a timeless eternal truth, but rather the truth that was and that will be, before and in a higher sense after creation, revelation, and redemption. On the Rosenzweigian view that I'm suggesting here, redemption is a human actualization whose full realization depends on God. It is neither a humanly attainable ideal, nor a regulative ideal, nor a solely critical ideal. It is not humanly attainable because it cannot be fully achieved without God. It is not a regulative ideal because without God, we cannot approximate more or less to the redemption of the human and the world. But nor is it a solely critical ideal which cannot be achieved at all, but against which we and the world can be found wanting. Redemptive action is not only possible, it is actual. Whenever there are individual acts of love, whenever there is, for example, the observance of the Shabbat, which is a taste of the world to come. But we cannot achieve a world in which all our acts are acts of love, and in which the day is one long Shabbat. We cannot achieve this without God. The attempt to achieve redemption of the human and the world without God, either by focusing on the human or by focusing on the world, as I have said, will lead to unimaginable horrors. Consequently, we should throw out the notion of redemption, unless redemption itself can be redeemed. And redemption can be redeemed only insofar as we contribute in all humility, in awe and love, to the self-redemption of God. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Franz. It was very interesting. We should always remember that there is no such a thing as an individual redemption in the Jewish tradition. The community is being redeemed, and the community is in charge on redemption. There is no such thing as one single individual who can redeem himself or herself, just as much as, according to the Kabbalistic tradition, there is no such a thing as God who can redeem itself or can redeem alone humans. It's very interesting that those are mutual relations. Man is called to help in the redemption of the Shekhinah as part of God, and God is promising to help in the redemption of the community of Israel through the Messianic revelation. No one can redeem alone, not the Messiah, not God, not the people. And redemption is always a communal thing. Before I would call Professor Rosenberg, I would like to quote one sentence of Gershom Scholem, who had contributed to the scholarship of Kabbalah, mysticism, messianism, and redemption more than any other individual. So said Scholem, the power of the messianic idea is weighed against the infinite powerlessness that is revealed in Jewish history throughout the generations of exile, when it could not rise on the stage of history. One more time. The power of the messianic idea is weighed against the infinite powerlessness that is revealed in Jewish history throughout the generations of exile, when it could not rise on the stage of history. We were talking here and we heard here quite a lot on various connections of redemption, but we should recall that in Jewish history, redemption was always the other part of exile. There was no discussion on redemption without discussion on exile, and no interpretation of exile without dreaming on redemption. Our next speaker, I'm pleased to invite Professor Shalom Rosenberg, who is Professor Emeritus of the Hebrew University, who had started his studies many years ago in his work, Logic and Ontology in the Jewish Philosophy of the 14th Century. At 1974, if I recall correctly, you finished your dissertation, summa cum laude, and his work was concentrating on three major issues: on logic and scientific thought, and the relation between religion and science, on religion and ethics, and on the meaning of following in the ways of God as a direction for the human being, and the relation between Jewish ethics and general ethics in the work of Aristo, Kant, and Nietzsche. And the third one is the foundation questions of Jewish belief about Torah and revelation and redemption and messianism. In the last decade, Professor Rosenberg was dealing with the theological dispute between the author of the Tanya and Nefesh HaChaim, which is Hasidim and Mitnagdim, and the question of religion and ethics, including the work of Immanuel Levinas and the philosophy of religion from Moses Mendelssohn to Franz Rosenzweig. Among his works, which are numerous, I would note only three: Good and Evil in Jewish Thought in Hebrew, Torah ve'Mada, Torah and Science, a broad reflection on the relation of Jewish thinkers to science, and following Jewish time, the philosophy of the Jewish calendar. Professor Rosenberg, please.
Thank you very much. Okay, I want to try to speak about the problem of God's possibility to be redeemed, but I want to begin with my concept. I try to put into a paper whatever I want to speak today, and I hope that things will be clear, and also we add the possibility after this, whenever it will come the time, to discuss the points that I wanted to add in this concept. At least there is my idea was that I would like to say something about the concept of the redemption of God, but I will not use what Rosenzweig wrote, but rather than what he did not write. And my idea is that this is the point that I want to put before you. And not only he didn't speak, but I would like to say something and to get your this is a very problematic issue that not only he didn't write, but he didn't have any conception of what the problem is. And thanks God that he didn't see it. And I will try to show you what. First of all, I have to ask your forgiveness for the chutzpah to add to the biblical and Talmudic text yet another text. That means I will try to bring to you another text, and in a way to make some kind of try to present you with a text that exists, but almost no one went to it in, I would say, in our times. And I want to try to show you, to say to you, that we are now, I am not trying to speak something that is in a way, I would like to begin what is one of the forgotten, can say, forgotten phases in our concepts, in our tradition, and is the first debate that we can find between a man and God. In my opinion, this debate, in a very, very logical way, it has a very old, say, time, but the debate continues throughout the generations. What is changing is the passing of time, and it merely its concepts is being adapted to religious and philosophical changes. No one wrote about this continued debate, but I consider it exists. And the first part of this debate is preserved in the introduction to the book of Job. In this introduction, there is a debate between extraordinary one between God and the devil. And in the middle is the man. And what is happening there is something that deals with human suffering, and especially the suffering that seems unjust. And in a way, I would say that our debate today, or our possible working together this day, is the concept is is God and is the man seeing or bringing something new for understand the human suffering, if it's possible, and if not, let us see if there is another way. Okay, and what I would say that I want to repeat it, that the first part of the text that I'm going to speak about it, that means the first two chapters in the book of Job, and this is something that I would like to bring to you to speak something about it, and I think you will forgive my boldness, and I would like to suggest that other things will have to be continued and studied a little more. Okay, now the arguments between the devil and God centers about the human being. And let us be more specific. It breaks out because God engages in the most dangerous experiment that God has done. The most dangerous experiment was that he grant man free choice. This is the only one specific existence is the man that is speaking, that is using his free choice. Something without precedent in the world of the angels. And I understand the Kabbalah, there is a little different. Okay, it's different. But I think that in our tradition, we find the possibility to see the point, very important point, the idea that the man is free. And this is something that we have to put it before us, and we will continue a little after this. And I think that the idea of the uniqueness of this concept is very important. And this is the only one real experiment that is. No exist, that it doesn't exist anything else. How the people, we can say, different thinkers has spoken about it, but there is the bigger problem is that this is happening in a way than the debate about before God and Satan. And if we want to change it, this concept is possible, but this is something that is very, very important. Now, it's very interesting. How can be this kind of discussion between God and the man and the devil? How can it be? And I try to understand it, and I would like to again to read this text. It doesn't exist, and I will tell you how they began this concept of the problem of the discussion between God and the devil. What was the reason? How does it develop this discussion between them? And what is interesting that we have to understand something that God has done in order to make possible this discussion. And from this discussion we can continue and think in another way. And we have here, I would say, very, very strange text. It doesn't exist, but it exists. The problem is really, in one concept, is that is something like God has to play a fair play to what doesn't accept him or make problems of his situation. What is the meaning, I would ask, of a game of roulette in which God is a participant? God, after all, knows the outcome. Ask, of course, how can he work? How can we make a bet in this world? He knows already what will happen. Some change has to do. And I know whenever I cannot ask counter some kind of strange answer in the Jewish philosophy, I go to the Kabbalah. And I went there, and I think that we can find in one place, there is a really interesting questions about what's happening here. And the problem is, how can God make something open, something free? And I would say there is only one place that I can find, what we can find this. And this is an almost forgotten Kabbalist of the late 70th and 80th century. We know very much about him because he was discussing a difference between the Ramchal, very known Ramchal, and this Kabbalist that his name is Immanuel Hayriki. He described the possibility of a theological miracle. That means that only if God makes a theological miracle, then it can be a really problem for man and for everything else. What is the meaning? In my first studies, when you remember that I was working during a time in problems of logic, and I think that think that there are three different miracles that God can do. One of them is the miracle of nature, like in the when we go out from Egypt. These are very, very simple miracles. We don't have to speak. There is another form of miracle. This is very more interesting. Logical miracles. And this was interesting. In my opinion, this is some discussion in the kind of miracles, if they exist or not exist. And this is interesting. And but I think it can be understand logical miracles. And I would say that there is something strange but interesting, that if you want to have some kind of picture of what is a theological miracle, I would say is very interesting. Like when you play a game in Schachmat, and you know that there is every one of us of two, no, I will call it in English, ratzim.
Players.
Huh?
We can say players.
No, they have to, not everyone. Some of them, you can do this miracle. And what is happening is muy interesting. Why? Because you can never come in this play that both of them shall have the same color. And if there is color, then one of them, or one of them cheated, or it was a super logical miracle. And this is not problem. But now we come to the miracle more absurd than all of them. And this is a theological miracle. And here is when these Kabbalists say that God can stop his knowledge of the future, and God can play with a man in a totally free world. And we can see then what is happening. For God is also then something, what is his play? His play is that he has done this super miracle, then a theological miracle, that the man is free, totally free, and even free from God's knowledge. There are many, many places where the very, very important thinkers in Jewish thought, they gave an answer of this, but okay, it's very difficult to understand or not understand. And God bars himself from the knowledge of what will happen. And this explanation, I can say, takes out our paradox, and we are now really working with God in our way, how we have to do. I told you this part because it's a very, very interesting concept, and I don't know the answer. I really ask myself, I think that there are two possibilities, but one of them I will also only give it to you, and ask, when you will know the answer, please call me. And it's very important. Because what I am doing, I think that when we come to this concept of the concept tan important, the concept of the total freedom of the man, we can trying to understand why the concept, the ideas of Rosenzweig were very much sympathetic to the Judeo-Christian theology, but they didn't were sympathetic with the Islam. Why? And this is something that I know that there is a problem and remember very well when people were in an encounter and asking what was the difference. In my opinion, there is only one question, answer. The human, for Rosenzweig, human existence between freedom of choice seems meaningless. That means you can be a religious. And I say it because this problem has some groups in the some groups, religious group, are a problem if they are Christian, and there are problems, even some of them, of Jewish thinkers. There are many, few of them, but there are. And here we are, some kind of, in my opinion, is that we cannot do something that is some kind of problem for God. This is something that I am here, and I'm now thinking and say I can discuss God, and I can try to go in another way. And I think that this freedom of choice seems meaningless for Rosenzweig. If this is correct, Rosenzweig here didn't have the possibility of go out from this kind of theological problem. Now we can say we can begin to think about the problem of the debate between God and Satan. What is interesting, that is, I show you, if we read the, we can say the books, the classic books, we can say that there is a very short discussion between God and the devil. And how did it finish is something that we can discuss it. But we can say that in the history, the Jewish people had to understand, had to live in this discussion between God and from one side, and in the other side, the discussion of God and the difference from this understanding. And I will try to give only one example. I think, as I told you, in my opinion, these two persons, God and the devil, continue to discuss from then till our days. And I am in this. I hope, I think so. And they are discussing, and we can see in many ways I will be discussed. And every time was a encounter. The encounter between God and Satan, and we are exactly these entities that we can give our the victory to the Satan and to God. And I can say I only want to give you one example, and not many of others, but they are really many of them. In round one was when Jewish faith had to fight Hellenism. When the concept, when Greek religions and Greek concepts and Greek philosophy come into our places, and we and our very old fathers and mothers had to say their word. They was in a way they didn't. There was some in a way when he had to abandon his religion. but they didn't do it. Not everyone, but many, many of them, like God wanted to see where are these. They are not, that I can think about them. And you see that in a way, under the most difficult circumstances, suffering, torment, and torture, they prove his loyalty to God. This was the first part when the people of Israel, in a way, before it's muy possible that it was in the Nabucco, was in a way where we find the beginning of it, Nebuchadnezzar, but not in the same way like it was when Israel was in the sight or in the hands of the concepts of the religion, the Hellenic religion. And I would say now that I have no problem that to skip over many periods that test the Jewish faith in the most difficult ways, especially in Europe and also in other places, and we can turn to the modern period. I want now to go from our concept, the classic concepts, and I would say that this kind of discussion and that was between the Jewish concepts and in a way, God trying to speak about them, that they didn't lose him, they didn't went out from him, but it was difficult. And I can say we can come to our times. And in our times, we will not be, in my opinion, very, very helped by Rosenzweig. I cannot say that it's impossible, but I think that he couldn't do it. And from our time, I would only like to show you something can give us some concept of what is the problem in our times. And this is in a way when we can say that has the people of Israel kept their relationship with God. And if you want to, I will show you how you can see it. In the beginning was already very, very, in a way, many, many years ago, but this is the problem that exists. We can see in this context, we can read in the weekly Torah portion by Yale, a very important place where we read it in a very special way. We read it in every year. And there are two places. One of them is Vayelech, and the other one is Azinu. And this is something that, in a way, I would say, something that has to do with the redemption of God. And redemption here, in my opinion, must be understood in the way that if we can sacrifice bring our sacrifice, and in a way redeem God from this place where he is. It is very strange to do it, but I want, in a way, a general way, I want to say you, and I even would like to give you some kind of picture that can that we will be possible to see it. And I say that look into it in these two first. This is more or less the places where the Torah is finished. The Torah readings are finished, and there we can say this, that in Azinu Haftarah, and the part of the Bible that we read together with the Torah, and means terrible, miserable days will come. this is the prophecy there. And this is a very important, because in a way there is a problem of our suffering, but there is another problem that in a way, in a Jewish way, is even very, very more problematic and very more dangerous. When in the Zinu, we listen to this concept. Is surely it is because our God is not in our midst that these tragedies have befallen us. That means the devil has to do some kind of demonstration that in order to make understood what is the problem or what is the sin of the people of Jews, is that the people of Jews left God. It didn't left God in all times, but this is something that in a way we can say we lost God. Why? Because in other words, a day will come. This is the idea of this haftarah. There is place in the Bible, in different places. A day will come when the suffering will be such that the people will ask, "Is God among us?" And more generally, is there a God at all? This is something, in my opinion, perhaps I am a mistake, that people in the time of Rosenzweig didn't listen them. They were, of course, they were very important assimilation on living, we can say, the people assimilating to the modern aspects of life, but no. And the Bible teaches us to study Azinu, the text that shows us that even in the midst of evil, God is with us. That means, in a way, if you want me to explain it in the words of the coming back of God, the aspect, in a way, what we can say, what do you think about is a possibility of redemption? In a way, this is a redemption. A redemption that we can go back to God and God are listening to us. And would say, all troubles are a result of the word of the Lord, and Azinu proves that we are commanded not to lose hope. That means, about moments, then our Torah, the law that we have to live with them, is the law of something that the prophet Ezekiel made from him one of the biggest concepts that lives with us till our way, that we have not lost hope. And the idea of the hope is something that we have to do. And it reminds us that God, and now I will understand, I will try to make, explain a little what is the meaning then of this kind of coming back, this kind of you can say, the possibility of bringing together and have some kind of redemption. And what I want to like is something that after what I wrote after a time, and I don't know who wrote it, something in me wrote it, but I want to say what I am saying here in a way. That Azinu, the last parts in the Bible, remains something that I would say, if you want to know who, for instance, is the man that was very, very influenced by it. He was influenced by people like Kuzari, when he's speaking that the God we can suffer, but we have our faith in God. and God revealed himself. Now we go to history for a couple of seconds of Mount Sinai, chose the people he loves and gave them the Torah. That means this is the very important, why are we together with God? But unfortunately, history chose all another way. If the devil appeared, thinking about it, the devil didn't play fair. The devil was used, the concept was, he has to be, to live, because he wanted to know who won. But the devil, in a way, we can say that there is a problem. And I would try to tell you what is the only answer to it, something that you can see. This is a very strange of coming back to God, and of in a way as to given the possibility that God shall be with me. If the devil appeared, and if I knew it was the devil, I would know that the chosen people is the enemy of Satan, the people against his faith and upon whom he unleash our severe suffering. That means that this very, very strange way how we can now understand what happening. It was the meaning of what the meaning of coming back after this, very after the concepts of our aspect. With over the years, there were many haters of the Jews, big and small, but only in recent time we can say the Satan appeared, and appeared. In this was concept of Nazism. And when it arose, it stated explicitly, you, meaning Jews, are my enemies. We can say the Shoah is the way with we are listened from the last words of the words of the devil, when I say, you are my enemies. And from here we learn the meaning of the aforementioned leap. I will understand, I will go to the leap in my last words in a couple of minutes. And I say the Jews are the chosen people based in Satan's testimony. And the testimony was that Satan did not hate Israel because he was a people or because power or money law. All other things were just ways in which Jews were hated. The Jewish baby and the Jewish old men who would not kill a fly were enemies of Hitler because he felt that they were the, we can say, who is speaking or is doing Satan. They were some kind of reality of the Satan. And thus the Holocaust was some kind of proof, another anti-Sinai. It was anti, but it was a Sinai, something that God is with us. In Auschwitz, Satan appeared and showed us the big leap, showed us that we need to see beyond the eyes of the angel of death, because whoever was in Auschwitz, he was inside the death, like apparently. But no, and in this moment, I would like to bring one of my memories. Unlike in Ingmar Bergman's movie, The Seventh Seal, we will see something else, and not a meaningless void, because the woman there says, after your eyes, there is nothing. There is no God. This is the idea of him. But there is nothing. And I would say that there is something very, very important in here, in the way where the angel of death has something after it was appeared to be nothing. So I would say that the normal things we can learn, where we find ourselves today from the perspective of this latest round, is not to lose the message of the absurd. This is the absurd, but don't leave the message. To live beyond the absurd is this what we have to live now, today, after the Shoah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rosenberg. We certainly covered a great deal in this speech. Does anyone wish to comment? Professor Askani, would you like to say? Professor Frank, no? Professor Rosenberg, would you like to say anything to the other commentators?
We will be in a discussion. This is interesting.
Okay. Does anyone of the audience would like to raise a question?
What? They have a paper.
Hmm? Okay. Well, it's very late, so I thank you all for these three speakers very much for your interesting perspective.